Space law is a branch of international law that tries to manage human activity in outer space. It is one of the newest branches of law. The first satellite to go into space was in 1957, put up by the then Soviet Union. Through the rest of the 20th century, the United States and the Soviet Union were the leaders in sending up spacecraft, whether with or without astronauts. As more countries started to send spacecraft into space, it became important to try to have some rules about who could be where. In the 1960s and 70s, the members of the United Nations adopted 4 major treaties that help govern human activity in space. The Outer Space Treaty, which was adopted by the United Nations in 1967, creates the framework for activities in space. First, it sets the rules. It says that space is open to all states, all countries. Any country can be involved in space. The Outer Space Treaty also states that outer space is owned by all. It is not subject to being sovereign space. No one country can say, this part of space is mine. Instead, it's described as, quote, the province of all mankind, end quote. The Outer Space Treaty also says that space, and particularly the moon, can only be used for peaceful purposes. And it says that countries cannot put weapons of mass destruction into space. And finally, it says that individual governments are responsible for the activities undertaken in space by entities associated with their countries. The Rescue Agreement is a modern version of one of the oldest concepts in international relations. Going back for hundreds of years, it has been the duty of seafarers to rescue people who are in distress on the oceans. If you're in a sinking ship, it's the duty of a seafarer, whether foe or friend, to fish you out and save you. That same principle is applied to space. The Rescue Agreement also says that if you are, let's say, an astronaut who splashes down in the ocean, that then anybody who's nearby should come and pick you up and rescue you. It's a fundamental principle applied to the modern day. It's one of our most important agreements in terms of caring for each other as humans face the dangers of returning from space. The 1972 Liability Convention basically says that if your spacecraft damages somebody else's spacecraft or somebody's structures or building on Earth or hits an aircraft, you're responsible, and that you may have to pay damages if your spacecraft damages somebody else's property. The Registration Convention was concluded in 1975 and came into force in 1976, and it reinforces the fundamental idea that if you send something into space, it needs to be registered on an international list so that the rest of the world knows that your spacecraft is in space. These 4 treaties create very practical international standards for human activity in space. However, as the treaties became more specific, fewer states ratified some of them. The 5th important space treaty is known as the Moon Agreement, which was adopted in 1979. It goes into greater detail about the uses of assets that may be found on the moon. However, the major spacefaring countries have not ratified it. The United States has not ratified it, nor has the Russian Federation, nor China, nor others. This is particularly related to concerns about limits on the uses of the moon. Now that more countries can land on the moon, it will become important to understand how we might create rules for continued scientific and possibly even commercial activity on the moon. During the 1960s and 70s, the leading actors were national governments, and their leading activities were scientific or related to national security. One of the most important developments of the early 21st century has been the arrival and expansion of commercial space. We now have new dynamic companies that are able to launch rockets into space and help place satellites into orbit, often that provide the communications that you use every day. The newest phenomenon is the mega constellation. These are systems of thousands of satellites that provide vital communications. The Earth is ringed by constellations of satellites providing vital communications. This is fundamentally new in human interaction in space. Imagine if you were driving and you're going down the highway and there are many more cars swirling about you. That's a more dangerous situation. There's a greater risk of collision. In space, although the physics is different than being on Earth, there's still the risk of collision. And if satellites collide, they can break up into many little pieces of debris. That debris stays in space and can swirl around the globe at speeds of 17,000 miles per hour. That's incredibly fast. That means that a small piece of debris, if it were to strike another satellite, would create more debris. And even worse, if it were to strike a person in space, for example, someone on the International Space Station, would be life-threatening. So the biggest risks in space from this greater congestion are collision and debris. Current space law is inadequate for addressing the current challenges of space. The framework treaties set out the basic foundation, but they were not designed for a world with thousands and thousands and thousands of satellites. The current rules do not provide for traffic management to manage thousands of satellites. Therefore, governments will need to work with companies and others to create rules of the road. Just as you have rules on the highway, we need rules in space to help manage the increased traffic brought by human innovation and the expansion of satellites and other devices in space.